Welcome to Cut the Crop, keeping you in the know about everything you grow. Researchers, growers and other interesting folk delivering insights and information on topics ranging from agronomy to profitability. Brought to you by the Foundation for Arable Research.
Hello and welcome. My name is Alison Stewart and I'm your host of this session of Cut the Crop. And today we have a very well-known farm researcher, Richard Chynoweth. Hi, Richard.
Hello.
Welcome. So, Richard, you've been tiki-touring around to the other end of the world, along with actually quite a lot of New Zealand seed growers and industry reps, and you've been at the International Herbage Seed Conference in France. So we thought it would be a good idea to find out what gems of wisdom that you were able to bring back. But maybe we'll just start off by big picture thing. What do you think the main differences are between what the European, the French seed producers are experiencing versus what's happening in New Zealand?
Yeah, okay. So New Zealand has, I guess, some pretty big advantages being isolated. And having a maritime environment. So the big thing that the French growers kept talking about was climate change and temperature. Increased temperature through, well, I guess it's late spring, early summer, leading to drought and competition with the cities for water use. So irrigation-wise, a lot of them had stopped irrigating because of water restrictions. So that water was needed for people to drink in the cities and that side of it. So I looked at it and said our climate was quite different. Relatively stable, even though it throws some challenges. We don't have to think too hard for a bad seed harvest 2 years ago now with wet weather. But overall, that was the big thing they were talking about. Also, like our soils are very resilient compared with theirs, so organic matter levels were very low.
So what kind of levels are they working with? It
was hard to get some of that information through the language barrier, but from memory, sort of 2 to 4% organic matter through some of the soils in France. So reasonably low by our standards. And most places we visited, either there was no structure or the soil was very, very hard and cloddy. And they have some issues around access to agrochemicals, which means that they either have gone one way or the other around cultivation. So a lot of the time they've gone to inter-row cultivating to try and control weeds in crops, and that's just a double-edged sword. So while it controls the weed, it then breaks down organic matter, has the soil exposed to rainfall events and things like that, and degrades it over time. So it's it's a different climate, both politically and the actual climate that they face.
But the reality is that that political environment and the legislative environment, usually we start experiencing that X number of years later. So I mean, they haven't banned glyphosate, but it's certainly restricted, isn't it? Particularly, yes. Government agencies and that don't use it. They can't use some of the neonics and various others. So what impact has that had, on their production systems? Because that's the challenges that we're going to have in the next probably 5 years.
Yeah, the glyphosate one was interesting. Some of it's glyphosate social stigma driven, and some of it's just a lack of dollars from the local council areas. But a lot of places, by our standards, very weedy. You walk through the streets in the town and there's wild oats growing, and so that gives you an idea of what they're experiencing at the moment. But also on the flip of that, they are doing a lot of biodiversity plantings in the cities, as well as trying to encourage that on farm. So I think there's a lot of New Zealanders taking up the biodiversity plantings just without it being forced on them. And so the EU setting, I guess, subsidies for having area that's non-productive, whereas we tend to be trying to plant some of that area out in native plantings and biodiversity plantings. The agrochemical scene, they've lost a lot of insecticides that we're likely to lose or are in the process of being reviewed. A lot of organophosphates, synthetic pyrethroids, and that causes them real problems, especially in red clover seed production, or I guess legume production, full stop. So they have a lot of weevils and other pests that chew away on seeds and flowers that we don't have, which is also another big advantage for us. And heaven forbid should we ever get some of those weevils, because they chew through lots of seeds in a very short time frame, but they don't have the chemical solutions for those at the moment. And if they do, they're only allowed to use them once or twice a season. So they've had to implement other management strategies like grazing or topping, leaving areas to try and catch them, where they might, and then destroy them later through mechanical means. So there's lots of things happening over there we should keep an eye on. We mentioned glyphosate, insecticides, but also Reglone. We talked a lot about Reglone having disappeared from use in France. And so that leads a whole lot of issues around harvesting, especially their legume crops, clovers and things like that. So, we just have to look there for the future, I guess, as to what might happen here.
I mean, can you tease out the impact on profitability? It's probably difficult because of the subsidies.
Profitability was hard to gauge. The pricing that they were receiving for a lot of crops was actually, I guess, similar or at least competitive to New Zealand. And again, it was hard to get translation out of a lot of the growers, but my conversations were that they had a return on investment of around about 2%. As opposed to working out gross margins and things like that. I found that really tricky to actually get hard numbers, but the return on investment appeared to be around 2% across the board, which probably comparable.
Comparable, yeah. The challenge will be if we lose the chemicals and we don't have the subsidies, that, that's going to really eat into New Zealand growers' bottom line.
Yes, that's right. And they're facing similar issues, like we were talking about harvesting grass seed crops and a lot of the cocksfoot being direct harvested. And the issue there was that they didn't want to or have the cash flow to be able to afford a windrower. And there wasn't any contractors that were really set up for it. So they would harvest the first time with a concave quite wide open on the drum and take what they thought was about 40% of the seed out of the crop, and let the rest dry for 5 to 7 days, and then come back and rethrash it. So that was one way around one issue that they were facing. The direct harvesting of grasses was quite common, where we windrow nearly everything.
We put a lot of time and energy into trying to keep blackgrass out of New Zealand, and I guess blackgrass would have been really noticeable in the crops in France, and obviously in the UK we hear a lot about that. So what were your experiences when you were going around looking? Yes,
I guess coming from New Zealand, where we don't have blackgrass, you notice it when you know what it is. So blackgrass, very common amongst cereal production, very common in laneways and tracks. Pretty much everywhere where there was grass that you walked, you could find blackgrass. So it's interesting because we didn't find a lot of blackgrass inside the seed crops that we looked at, but especially in the cereal production, there was, you could see the blackgrass sitting up above the cereals, just driving around.
So why do you think you weren't picking it up in the seed crops?
I think like the ryegrass and the cocksfoot we looked at, I think were dense enough. They might have been competing really heavily with it, and also they are similar colour. Whereas the cereals that was sitting, the seed heads are always sitting 20 centimetres above the crop.
So it's more noticeable. Yeah.
So it could just be a noticing difference. I'm not sure about the clover crops. Like, I don't recall seeing it in a clover crop. So maybe their chemical program's actually adequate. Because they do still have curb as a control option. So maybe that's doing the job in those crops.
Yeah. So, I mean, coming to the conference, I mean, what were the key take-home messages that you got out of the conference?
The conference itself is always, by international standards, a small conference. So one of the key things is that there's not actually that many people globally working on seed production in grasses, clovers, or grasses and legumes per se. So we had 170 people, and that's the biggest ever conference of that group.
And there must have been about 20 or 30 Kiwis.
I think there was about 30 New Zealanders.
Yeah.
And we were well represented from the industry, but also the growers. We had the biggest grower turnout by a long way at this conference. Although you've got to remember, Northern Hemisphere, pretty close to harvest when we were there in June. So yeah, there was a good New Zealand contingent. The other big thing is that like people in the herbage area are quite prepared to share ideas and information. Mm-hmm. They obviously will hold a few secrets close to their chest, as we might as well, but they're pretty open and prepared to share information. I guess first conference since COVID. Yeah. A lot of new people globally that are working in seed production, and actually quite a few people that have taken the opportunity to retire and step back from things. So quite a different conference to, what was it, 4 years ago that we're in Oregon, 2019. So yeah, quite different in that respect. Technology is starting to play a role in a lot of people's thinking globally.
So what kind of technology are we talking about?
So a lot of people, looking at, or at least as a group of researchers, looking at different uses of drones in particular. For mapping, and that could be like there was papers from Oregon around whether you can pick vole damage. So really, they were trying to pick soil where there shouldn't be soil in a paddock. A lot of mapping of weeds, technology to try and separate weed seed from saleable seed. Couple of papers around trying to use drones and things for variable rate nitrogen application. So yeah, lots of ideas in that space, but pretty hard to bring some of that back to New Zealand straight away.
But presumably a lot of mechanical weeding.
Especially in France, lots of mechanical weeding, just from their loss of agrochemical side, the side of things. The rest of the world, not so much talk about mechanical weeding. I guess Europe might be leading the way in that space. Interesting, we did visit an organic cocksfoot seed production farm where they'd gone to narrow rows to avoid or to have more competition and avoiding inter-row cultivation. So had researchers doing one thing and the actual producers doing the opposite.
The complete opposite.
Both have good merit. Like, you can understand why they've gone narrower.
Looking at it, the next 5-10 years for New Zealand seed growers, what do you think FAR should be focusing on? I mean, are we doing all of the right things, or have you brought back some insights where you think that there might be other things that we should be looking at?
I think the biggest challenge for us is to maintain profitability while we sit on the other side of the world to a lot of the other producers. So, our biggest friend or biggest competitor could actually, be Tasmania. So there was a group from Tasmania, and that's actually where the next conference will be held in 2 years' time. They have increased their production massively in the last 10 years. They're competing, if not out-competing us, on a yield per hectare basis. And
that's driven by what?
Predominantly driven by irrigation expansion in Tasmania, but also the professionalism that they now bring to their businesses. So when I visited possibly 10 years ago, people didn't own their own combines. They relied on combines to come down from South Australia and Victoria to do their harvest. Well, that's all changed. They own their own equipment. They can do things on time, and they've learned a lot from attending the likes of these conferences around seed production. So I think we need to maintain our profitability from a grower sense, we have a big advantage around endophyte knowledge of growing endophyte and high endophyte seed lines, which the rest of the world are really investigating at the moment. There's a big push in Europe to grow, I guess we call them novel endophyte grasses that can have their own niche in different areas, and they're grappling with how to produce that seed, where we have a pretty good understanding of, or a very good understanding of that in New Zealand, what we have to do. And I think that's one of our advantages of swathing over the direct harvesting in Europe, that our seed gets drier and we can maintain the endophyte levels as well as the seed germination levels. Yeah. So I think, our biggest issue is just to try and maintain a cap on the cost of production, really.
I know, but that's almost outside our control, isn't it? And so that's the challenge that, arable growers have across all of their crops. But you came away feeling relatively positive.
It's interesting. You always look at your own backyard when you're here going, gee, what are we doing? Are we doing all the right things? And then you travel away and you realise how lucky we are to be in New Zealand, the climate we've got, the distance from the political unrest in Europe. And overall, we actually do a really good job. And we have a really good understanding of what we're trying to do. And the growers have a good understanding of how to manipulate the plants to produce good seed yields. And you look at that and think, well, New Zealand's actually really well placed. We have the climate. Most importantly, we have the people that, right through the value chain of the production, right from woe to go in that production stream. So, no, I think New Zealand should be pretty comfortable where it is. We've got, 3 to 5, maybe 10 years of the future to look at when we travel to Europe. And if we can maintain that, then we've got a small advantage that we can look that way and build on.
Actually, one thing I didn't ask you when we were talking about the ag chems, are they integrating biologicals into their system or not?
I don't recall any conversation around biologicals. It might just be I wasn't in the right place at the right time, but I don't recall there being any talk of biologicals. Trying to think whether even on the research farms we visited, I don't recall seeing anything like that. No.
Yeah, because again, if we are looking at biologicals now, it is a major way of safeguarding, our ability to keep. And I know some of our growers, sort of think, oh, bloody biologicals, But when you see what's happening overseas, it makes sense to at least be investigating them and saying, can we actually use them and can they add value?
Yes,
and we've obviously got some work going on with CIRC in that space.
Definitely. The one thing I can think of is that they were quite interested in biocontrol of weevils and other insect pests, but that's about as far as the conversations I can recall on biologicals went. Yeah. I'm trying to think, I don't even know if there was a paper at the conference around biologicals and control of pests and disease. So there are some real candidates there that could be well and
might
truly
be our
open.
Competitive advantage, Richard.
Yes.
Okay, so any final words or comments that you'd like to make about the trip away? I mean, it's probably the first trip that a lot of people have made since pre-COVID.
Yes. And
so it's literally just reconnecting with the rest of the world.
That's a big thing, and I think everyone's really hungry for that right at the moment. Doesn't matter where you're from in the world, people are hungry for not just a Zoom link or a Teams meeting. They're hungry to talk face to face, get to reconnect with people they may not have seen or may not have ever met. There was just a changing of demographic at the conference. A lot of younger people that are starting out,
which is great.
That's awesome.
And you, of course, have taken on a new position.
Yes.
Tell us more.
So I guess I was voted president of the International Herbage Seed Group. So I'm still really trying to come to grips with what that means.
What does it mean?
But it does mean that I have, I guess, the responsibility to try and keep the group going for the next 4 years, or 2 to 4 years, depending on how long the term is. But that, like, we'll try and run a successful conference in Tasmania, and the organising committee that's set up for there are already well along the way. So yeah, I think that'll be quite a good conference. It won't be at an ideal time for New Zealanders to travel. It'll be in November 2025, but should get a lot of Europeans that want to travel down and maybe travel across to New Zealand late November 2025. So yeah, I've got some ideas to try and reinstate some newsletters and bits and pieces like that have sort of fallen off during COVID. But yeah, hopefully we can get a number of New Zealanders to the next conference and actually get them excited about the group, because it is a great way to meet a whole lot of other like-minded people.
Yeah, and it's really good that you say that there was young people coming in, because that's always the biggest worry, is that, in a lot of agricultural sectors, as the older sort of people are retiring, we're not getting the young people in. So it's good news.
Yes, yeah, and it was right across the board. Wasn't just any one country or continent. It was everywhere seemed to have that trend.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, thank you very much, Richard, and thanks very much, listeners. Have a great day on the farm.
Thanks for tuning in to Cut the Crop, presented to you by FAR. If you'd like to know more about any of the topics discussed or have any suggestions for future topics, go to www.cutthecrop.co.nz.